I now give the floor to the representative of Pakistan.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd also like to thank Under Secretary General Vladimir Voronkov for his insightful briefing. And I also thank Executive Director CTAD Natalia German and FATF President Elisa de Anda Madrazo for their remarks. We take note of the 21st report of the Secretary General on the threat posed by ISIL to international peace and security. Pakistan condemns terrorism in all its forms and manifestations. Few nations have done more for the success of the global counterterrorism efforts. Fewer still have bled more in this fight. Pakistan has been at the forefront on both counts, with 80,000 casualties and hundreds of billions of dollars in losses to our economy. Pakistan's sacrifices are unmatched. So is our resolve to eliminate this menace. I should recall that Al-Qaeda was largely decimated due to Pakistan's efforts. Today, we stand firm against Daesh and its affiliates, the Fitna al-Khawarij, TTP, BLA, and the Majeed Brigade, that are actively collaborating in Afghanistan and the region, sharing resources, information, and physical space to carry out attacks against Pakistan. Mr. President, the Secretary General's report underlines the evolving danger. First, Daesh and its affiliates continue to pose serious threat to international peace and security. They continue to adapt and retain operational capabilities. Daesh affiliates are increasing concentration in Africa, particularly in West Africa and the Sahel. And this Council must make efforts to stem the mushrooming of terrorist entities in that region. Third, while Daesh has suffered setbacks in the Middle East, nearly 3,000 fighters are still entrenched across Iraq and Syria, and that is concerning. Fourth, the situation in Afghanistan remains precarious. With some 2,000 fighters, ISIL-K poses the most serious threat. Mr. President, indeed, terrorism within and from Afghanistan is the single most potent threat to that country, to the region, and the world. Although the Afghan interim government has been fighting ISIL-K, the threat from various other terrorist groups such as Fitna al-Khawarij, TTP, and Baloch militant groups having sought refuge in ungoverned spaces in Afghanistan remains unaddressed. For Pakistan, the danger is grave and immediate. The TTP, with nearly 6,000 fighters, is the largest UN-designated terrorist group operating from Afghan soil. With safe havens close to our borders, it directly threatens our national security. There is credible evidence of collaboration between the TTP and BLA and the Majeed Brigade, including sharing of terrorist training camps that has targeted our strategic infrastructure, economic projects in Pakistan, and most tragically, our people. The Jafar Express passenger train hijacking and the holding of hostages by terrorists in March resulted in the loss of 31 innocent Pakistanis. Another terrorist attack on a school bus in Khusdar in May took 10 lives, 8 of them school-going children. These are not just numbers, these are stolen futures. And our principal adversary in the region is active in sponsoring terrorism in Pakistan. It bankrolls and supports terrorist proxies and carries out extraterritorial assassinations that have, in fact, gone global. Worse still, its blatant aggression against my country on the night of 6th and 7th of May this year in violation of our sovereignty and international law, and under the false pretext of counterterrorism, deliberately and indiscriminately targeted civilian population and infrastructure, resulting in the martyrdom of 54 innocent Pakistani nationals, including 15 children, some of them infants, and 13 women. Mr. President, when state terrorism masquerades as counterterrorism, international peace is often the first casualty. This Council should not look away. Mr. President, terrorism today is not just on the battlefield. It is online, it is algorithm-driven, it is financed through digital shadows. Terrorist groups are experimenting in the digital space to glorify violence and exploit social media platforms for online radicalization and recruitment of youth, particularly vulnerable individuals. ICTs and AI are being misused by terrorist entities for propaganda and to organize and recruit online. Mr. President, we must respond with clarity and conviction and through a holistic approach. First, we must address the root causes of terrorism. And I thank USG Voronkov for reminding us again today about the imperative of prevention, the importance of a longer-term vision, and the crucial need to take measures aimed at addressing the conditions conducive to the spread of terrorism. In simple words, Pillar 1 of the GCTS merits our full attention. Second, we must address state terrorism and oppression. The situations in Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir and the occupied Palestinian territories are the starkest examples where collective punishments against civilian populations, widespread and grave violations of human rights, forced demographic changes, and fabricated counterterrorism narratives and unlawful actions are being deployed by the occupation forces to prolong and sustain the illegal occupations and undermine and deny the legitimate right to self-determination of the populations of these territories. I would stress, occupation cannot be dressed up as counterterrorism. Third, we must clearly distinguish between terrorism and the legitimate struggle of peoples against foreign occupation and for exercising their right to self-determination. Fourth, we need to make adequate changes to the sanctions regimes to incorporate new and emerging threats and end the dangerous stigmatization of Islam and Muslims. We must accept the reality. There has been a surge in the emergence of right-wing extremist and fascist movements in several countries and regions of the world, leading to terrorist violence. Yet, we see a strong inclination to see acts by non-Muslims not as terrorism, but often described just as violent crime. It is not understandable and is indeed unacceptable that every name on the Security Council's terrorism list is Muslim, while terrorists and violent extremists elsewhere escape scrutiny. There is no non-Muslim in the lists. This must change. This situation also contradicts the UN's and this Council's stated position that terrorism is a global phenomenon and it cannot and should not be associated with any religion, nationality, civilization, or ethnic group. Fifth, we must address and regulate new tools of terror and strengthen cooperation from Interpol to national law enforcement to choke off the digital arteries of terrorist networks. Mr. President, effective CT efforts require joint action, firmly anchored in consensus-based principles and embedded in the framework of international law. We can better succeed against terrorism through unity and cooperation, without double standards or discrimination, and by preventing its exploitation for politically motivated agendas that attempt to shift public opinion away from the real challenges that we face today. Double standards and political agendas are themselves the oxygen for terrorism. We can defeat terrorism by fighting it together and fighting it justly. I thank you, Mr. President.